in the Tocharian script, because what happened at a certain point in time, the Egyptians adopted a Buddhist trade language through the trade routes and helped unify the tribes there in Lower Egypt or Upper Egypt, and that was in the Meroitic period. And it was one of the queens was Medea, that we talk about, a snake queen that was a Kandake or a Candace. And so they had a Buddhist script because they realized it was efficient because they were using hieroglyphics and Demotic script,
Wow.
So there's so much trade going on there between the Buddhists. Is that the gymnosophists as well? They call them gymnophysists.
Naked philosopher, that means in Greek.
Yeah.
Right.
Gymnosophist.
There's many different ideas of who those people could be. They could have been Buddhists. They could have been yogis. They could have been a version of Shaivite sadhus. We're not 100%
I think
sure.
Vedic philosopher is a good way to
Yeah.
Because
Point is, what I was going to say is that you have
it.
so many different philosophers at this period that are practicing this, going out into the wilderness, to study. Like, this is just a very common thing, and you have of many traditions. I just want to highlight it's not uniform, right?
Yeah. But yeah.
What's cool is that there is dialogue there, right? Like, Alexander brings the gymnosophists back with him. And there's a lot of scholars who believe that a lot of the Christian monastic tradition comes out of the Buddhist, right? They get the shaving of the head, they get the dietary restrictions and the clothes from these gymnosophists, because that is the essence of them, is this restriction, living this very modest middle life, right?
Yeah. I'm trying to find the actual text, but like, if anyone doubts that, like, there's so much evidence that the world was more globalized than you think. There's tens of people from Indian culture in the Greco-Roman lands, all the way as far as like, Cyrene. Basically, you have a pillar erected there in Brahmi, the Brahmi, which is basically Sanskrit. So you have that all the way in the west, and then like we just mentioned in the east, we have Alexander traveling out there. You have the Greco-Bactrian kingdom right on the Indus River, right there, Greek. You have statues of Shiva in Greek, and you have this is way before Christianity comes along. So there's already so the idea that there can't be any influences from Buddha or Krishna on Jesus is nonsense. It's just nonsense at that point. Now, just to be able to point and say which part it is, you can't. But the idea is very much possible. You can't say it's impossible.
It's pretty simple. Let's start with the basic breakdown. We got a K, an R, an I, an S, and H. R, do you want to put a C in front of it? R, and K, and a C. What? Krish. What? That ain't the same to you? I mean, how much?
Now, this is something that Manly P. Hall points out. He says he thinks there's a connection there. Linguists will say, well, Krishna, the Christos, the Messiah, comes from that Mosiach. It just etymologies, sure. Yeah. So, but like the idea that somebody might be thinking of Krishna as they're writing a story about the Christ. Yeah, I get what you're saying. I follow you on that.
Is that a virgin birth too? I'm not sure. Is Krishna a virgin birth?
Yes,
no, I don't
Krishna.
think so. Is it?
Yeah, no. Krishna's a virgin birth.
Oh, I didn't know that. What's the birth of Krishna? I have no idea.
Oh gosh.
I know there's different stories and all that stuff. To be honest, I'm not sure.
And is Radha Mary? Is Radha Mary at that?
In one of the stories, I think it's in one of the Vedic texts where, like the Rig Veda, it's just Krishna is not born. Krishna is eternal. In fact, Krishna and that Brahma, the creator Brahma, is actually from the mind of Krishna. And that's not Krishna in this text. It's actually what's the not Indra? Is it Indra? The other word for Krishna, which is something else. Krishna.
Yeah, the word for there's Vishnu, which
Vishnu.
is
there it is. There it is.
His divine form. Yeah.
That's what I should say. Vishnu, the creation story, is that Brahma, who's the creator, was from the mind of Vishnu, who's eternal. So there is no birth basically in Vishnu. But I know there's later stories that Christian is
there are many different ways to interpret this, and the Indian traditions generally allow for a wide variety. Okay, but like the one that like the basic idea, you have this an easy way to think about it that's general is the Trimurti, which is you have the three primary deities, which is Brahma, as you brought up, the creator, Vishnu, the preserver, and then Shiva, the destroyer.
Yeah.
Right, and this is in like mostly comes out of the Smarta tradition. Okay, but this is this idea that these three forces keep each other in balance. Okay, now what's interesting about this is that preservation force, okay, it actively participates in the creation of the universe, in the saving of the universe, right? So to preserve, it reincarnates and it comes into the world. So you have Vishnu coming again and again and again. All of these various, he comes as a dwarf, he comes as a fish, he comes as Krishna, he comes as Rama. You know, there are many different incarnations. In some traditions, they believe that the Buddha is an incarnation of Vishnu.
That's
some traditions they believe Jesus, right?
That's
is
in
an
in the Dhammapada, Buddha says, "I am Krishna." He says, "I am Vishnu." He just straight out says it. So that is such an important thing for connecting Buddhism to Hinduism. Is that Buddha becomes kind of like, in the sense of Jesus. Jesus is like the turning away from the old Pharisaic Judaism or Sadducee Judaism, whereas Buddha, just like Jesus, is turning away from the Hindu Vedic priesthood and starting up they both are like, the Buddhism is what to Hinduism Christianity is to Judaism. They're very much similar. They both come out of their traditions.
Yeah, that's a fair way to think about it. It's just more on a philosophical and practical level, at least in the earliest sense, because the Buddha is very much reforming and like the grand innovation of the Buddha is the middle way. Right. He rejects the ritualism of the Brahmins, which is the people who are practicing the classic Vedic religion, but he also rejects the extremism that you find in Jainism and other texts, which these are people who are practicing the austerities, who are starving themselves and trying to achieve this divine perfection. The Buddha kind of balances them out. But what's also interesting here, though, is like, what you're seeing is that there's a political discussion going on, and there's kind of this infighting going on across history, right? So one of the ways in which, like, for a long time, Buddhism kind of dominates India, but then you have this Hindu revival that comes out of this like Sanskrit grammar and out of this Vedantic philosophy, which then starts to kind of, they take some of the ideas of the Buddha and they start to elaborate on them and reflect them through their own texts, right? And you get this new innovation. This is where you get people like Adi Shankaracharya and this whole idea of monism, right? Or like in he would say something like neti neti, this idea that God is absolutely one and can't be anything, right? It's not this, not that, you know? It's that absolute, undivisible, perfect Brahman, you know? And like this kind of comes as a reaction to Buddhism, right? You know, so there's this flourishing of all these philosophical traditions in India. But what's also interesting, just to get us back to Christianity, is this idea of the Trimurti, right? The three deities, right? This image of these three divine figures again happens, right? The mother, father, and the child, but also the force of destruction, the force of preservation that appears into the world, and the force of creation itself. And you see this reflected in a lot of the Christian understanding, right? This understanding of you have the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit, you know? So
yeah, it's interesting.
And the Holy Spirit can sometimes be taken as a female entity because they can't erase the female. Back to what we're talking about. She's there. She ain't going nowhere. And so the Holy Spirit can take on a female connotation in different myths. And that's why you have Mary, you know. Mary's very popular in Christianity, that some people just worship Mary.
Yeah. You'll see this in like middle-aged Christian texts where some priest somewhere will write down like, and they were raiding our town, and I cried out to the Virgin, help us. Like, it didn't say Jesus or God or Father.
Yeah,
He cried
yeah.
out to the Virgin to help him. So like
No.
that's early on. You see that.